to The Upper Brand, the podcast where we break down the biggest stories in trademarks, branding, and the law affecting the world's most iconic brands. I'm Christine Young, a partner in Mayer Brown's intellectual property, brand management, and litigation practice, and your host for today's episode. Today, we're joined by Jeremy Hurewitz, who is head of Interfor Academy at Interfor International, which is a global investigation and security consulting firm that offers comprehensive domestic and foreign intelligence services to the legal, corporate, and financial communities. Jeremy is the renowned author of the book Sell Like a Spy, and he runs a unique program through Interfor Academy called Sell Like a Spy that's centered around the concepts in his book and provides business development lessons and communication strategies to sales teams and corporate executives. Welcome, Jeremy. Thanks for joining us today.
Great to be with you, Christine.
Great. So, your espionage-based framework, let's start there. Sell Like a Spy, you outline an espionage-based framework that emphasizes pre-engagement reconnaissance. Can you explain a little bit about that framework?
Yeah, I think that in the business world, we don't do enough kind of prep work for meetings. You might prepare your presentation and all of that, and you might even do some cursory work on the company and the individual. But I suggest going deeper, and I look to the CIA for what they do in terms of preparing for agent development. So a lot of work goes into developing an agent before any contact is made. You need to find what the motivation will be on the other side. So people look into things like, is there a sick child in this country that can only get the kind of care they need in the US? Will money be a factor? Are they part of an ethnic group that's been passed over? So an extensive dossier is developed on an individual, where they go to dinner, what, sports they play, where they exercise, all of these things. You don't need to go so deep on the corporate side, but I work with teams, especially using LinkedIn, which can be an incredible repository of details on somebody that you're looking to connect with. Where did they go to college? Is it a big college basketball university? And maybe you're a big college basketball fan. And then I give them ways to elicit information and start a relationship based off of some of these details. So we can look to that world of espionage to provide a framework of ways to get to know your client and prepare for meetings and BD events a little bit more thoroughly.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So, tying this to brand enforcement and anti counterfeiting strategies, what are some things trademark owners can do to ethically adopt spy style intelligence gathering to map out counterfeiting threats and market vulnerabilities or infringement hotspots throughout the world?
Yeah, that's a challenging one relating it to brands, but I think I have some thoughts there. I think it's all about, being inspired by that proactivity that I was talking about. Instead of being a spy who just meets an agent and relies on their personality and charm to win them over, they've done the necessary homework. I think, the individuals that you're mentioning in terms of brands enforcement, everybody should have this set a bit beforehand. So it's about monitoring threats. It's about understanding particular markets. And, Mexico is going to be different than Germany, and understanding where people are interacting with your product, where it might be counterfeiting. So, making sure that you have a sense of where problems might arise is doing the homework that you should do to prepare for the potential problems that could come along the way. Are there any sub-markets your products might be being sold to by, again, somebody in Mexico sends them to Germany and profits from the arbitrage? So it's about playing offense and not just playing defense in your preparation.
Yeah, so it seems important to have a dual boots on the ground strategy and maybe some internal, external, and online monitoring as well.
Yeah,
Can you talk a little bit
absolutely.
about that? How those interplay with each other?
Well, I mean, if you can have people in markets who develop in-country expertise, and then have a place where this can all go, and there's sort of a more global viewpoint, that's going to be helpful, whether you're a spy, whether you're a business developer, or whether you're a brand investigator. Understanding local context is always going to be something that will help you in just about any effort, whether it's enforcing a brand, making a sale, or just getting to know somebody on a local level.
Yeah, so I guess switching gears a little bit, in Sell Like a Spy, you discuss a technique called elicitation, which is a subtle technique used to extract information without direct questioning. Can you give some examples of how elicitation can be used in the field when you're implementing these proactive strategies?
Yeah, elicitation is one of the most popular things I talk about. People find it fascinating because you can literally learn about people without asking any question. That's one of the things I talk about because questions oftentimes make people defensive, cynical about your intentions, suspicious. So there are ways you can make statements that get people to just tell you things. Or sometimes it's not making a statement at all. One of the ways you can elicit information is just through awkward silences, which people tend to really dislike. And if there's an awkward silence, they oftentimes blurt things out. So I tell people that you can sometimes elicit information by not saying anything. And one of the best ways to elicit information is to use behavioral science, to use the way people tend to communicate, which is, I'll give you an example. So there's something known as the tendency to correct. So if I say to you, Christine, isn't your favorite color blue? You'll say, no, my favorite color isn't blue, it's red. Because we all want to correct the record about anything about ourselves. So there are levers that we can pull in human behavior that get us to tell you certain things. So the way I could see this in kind of a brand environment is if you had an investigator on the ground at a market, looking to sort of develop intelligence, say, and you might say to somebody, oh, that bag is really beautiful. And all you have to say is that, not where did you get it? What brand is it? Is it a knockoff? All you have to do is compliment somebody in that context. And they might say, oh, I got this, from a knockoff just around the corner. There's a stall, 3 doors down that is selling, actual real Gucci products. They're sold out the back door of the company in China where they're manufactured, and they're just, sold at a third of the price. So once you start complimenting people, you wind up getting them to tell you a bit more. That's another trigger for elicitation. So understanding that there are ways that people want to share information, that there are triggers in human behavior that cause them to respond in certain ways, you can get them to tell you things that you're looking for. Whereas if you ask them somebody very directly, if I ask that same person, hey, that bag looks too close to a Gucci bag. Where did you get that? I think they're going to be a little bit defensive, wondering if you're a law enforcement figure or if you're, somebody that might look down upon what they're saying. So I think the two approaches are quite different, and one will profit, the person asking, and the other won't help.
So it seems like a lot of careful planning is required by boots on the ground investigators before approaching anybody, and carefully crafting out those types of questions. Is there any sort of a playbook when you go in to do something like that? Do you typically sketch out sort of the angles that you're going to take to elicit information, or do you suggest just kind of, I guess, flying by the seat of your pants with some techniques in the back of your mind?
No, there are things you can think about. You want to do your, the diligence I was talking about earlier. Whether you're going into a certain market in a developing country, understanding the dynamics, what products are sold there. So just having a good sense of what your mission is, what the situation that you're entering is, and understanding those things are key. Flying by the seat of your pants is also something you're going to have to get comfortable with doing this kind of work. But understanding the tools you have at your disposal, which I talk about in the book, and you and I have talked about relating to the brand world, and hopefully I just demonstrated where elicitation would fit in, is a good idea. But there are other ways that you can, to your question, structure questions in a conversation. I write about what's called the violin conversation, as I've dubbed it. So if you picture a violin, it's thin at the end and it's bigger in the middle, and that's where the sweet music gets played, as I like to point out. So the idea for the violin conversation is that people tend to remember the beginning and end of a conversation and not the middle so much. So if you're looking to elicit a piece of intelligence from somebody who might have awareness of a counterfeiting situation, but it might be quite sensitive, you want to start and finish with some easier questions that they won't find troubling at all to answer. And then you want to craft a question in the middle of the conversation, again, using levers of human behavior, whether it's people's tendency to respond to things in kind, whether it's the tendency for people to engage in gossip or correct the record about something about themselves. Understanding the triggers of elicitation and crafting that question or two in the center of the conversation is a good framework for how to elicit the type of information you're looking for in that kind of sensitive setting.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So sandwich your tools and your important questions in the middle of questions or comments that may or may not be so important. So
Exactly.
yeah, so I guess speaking of tools, in Sell Like a Spy, you talk about a number of tools that are used.
Mhm.
There's a core theme of forging trust through calculated vulnerability.
Mhm.
Can you explain what that means and give some examples of that tool?
Yeah, absolutely. I like to say that vulnerability breeds humanity and humanity breeds credibility. In the business world, people so often feel like they have to have their, suit and tie on, their business clothing, their armor up of professionalism. And of course, you want to be professional and all those things, but we're also human beings. And spies know that if you make yourself vulnerable, it narrows an intimacy gap and gets people to buy into, your relationship a bit more. And I write about in my book how a spy had a child on the autism spectrum, and he was operating in the Middle East for many years, and where you talk a lot about family. And by sharing that about himself, by making himself vulnerable, he connected more deeply with the agents that he ultimately recruited. I talk about in the book how I had a brain tumor over a decade ago. It was benign, but it cost me the hearing in my right ear, rather, and how that comes up tactically. If you sit with me in a restaurant, I try to keep you on my left, these kind of things, and it comes up. And I've watched over the years how when I do make myself vulnerable in that way, people wind up telling me very significant things about themselves or a loved one. So calculated vulnerability and sharing and opening yourself up can really lead to connecting more deeply with someone.
Yeah, so I guess tying this back to brand protection and enforcement, how can this trust building technique translate to brand protection, and how can it be used to identify the source of counterfeit goods and supply chains or other useful information that investigators might use in order to advance enforcement efforts?
Yeah, absolutely. There's an anecdote that comes to mind from my book where Steve Romano, a former chief hostage negotiator in the FBI, earlier in his career when he was an agent overseas, it was after the Cold War, and he was in Bulgaria, where there had been a huge breach of intelligence amongst the local staff. Many embassies overseas are predominantly staffed by local nationals. And somebody at the embassy was sharing intelligence with the Soviets, with another intelligence agency, and they needed to figure out who the culprit was. In the same way, I would imagine many of your clients who are dealing with counterfeiting and other issues need to figure out if there is an insider threat, someone that is selling the company's IP. Well, the approach that Steve and his colleagues took wasn't to threaten everybody and to start, scaring everybody. It was to sit down with somebody and try to relate to them, to say, look, I understand that, the local government was putting a lot of pressure on people here, offers of better housing for you and your family, offers of better education for your children are enormously tempting, and it's very understandable that you engaged in this. But we're going to get to the bottom of who this was, and to the extent that someone is forthcoming with us, it will be a lot better for everybody concerned if that happens. So creating a sense of understanding why they did the bad thing is important. So on a brand side, if you're a chief security officer, if you're an investigator on, brand IP, whatever your title is, and you're looking into this, if you're sitting with someone and say, look, Tim, I know that you've been experiencing a divorce. I imagine that there is a lot of, cost associated with that. There might be financial pressures on you that are making this feel like the only way out. I can help you if you tell me what happened here. If you don't tell me and you lawyer up, or you go, something else happens, this could be a lot more of a drawn out, extensive, and hard situation for you. So it's again about empathy. It's again about understanding the other side a little bit and how they work. Maybe I haven't brought up empathy yet because I talk about it so much. But empathy is the WD-40 of communication. So understanding the other side, not making threats, and trying to give them, even if you don't believe it, a sense that you get why they did what they did will lead to a more fruitful investigation.
Got it. And that sort of explains why sometimes investigations take some time. I believe you want to. It seems like you really want to build that trust, and then try to get the information out of them instead of just going right at somebody with very direct questions or threats.
Yeah, people get defensive, and they don't think that they were wrong. People justify why they did certain things. So if you can get into their mind and sort of say, "Yeah, I get why you did what you did," but you don't have to really believe it. You just have to get them to share and make them feel like you understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and really interesting.
Mhm.
So in terms of another tool that you discuss in your book, you discuss using disguises and undercover identities. Now, I thought this was a pretty interesting one. Can you explain how and when this technique is used and is used most effectively?
Yeah, I run a little workshop when I'm training teams. Sometimes I call it spies in disguise. And it's fun to initially talk about how I initially talk in most of my keynote speeches and trainings how, we need to level set about spies. They are not what you see in Hollywood. They're not James Bond. They're not chasing, cars and bad guys in that kind of way. They're people developing relationships. And, when it comes to, spies and disguises, that is actually a real thing. There's a chief of disguises at the CIA. They have to use cover stories and disguises. There's a whole fascinating history of how that's used and all of that. And there's lots of contemporary themes about facial recognition software and other challenges that spies face. But we'll put that aside for a moment. The workshop that I run and try to get people to buy into is the idea that you can use a disguise of sorts to bring out the best sides of your personality. So we go over, celebrities, people that you admire, whether it's from the world of, literary fiction or, Broadway or TV shows, movies, sports, whatever the case may be. We talk about individuals who embody traits that you admire, dedication, leadership, tenacity. And I urge people to put on a mask of that person, to put on a disguise to embody that person. Sometimes I use the example of Bill Clinton when it comes to active listening because he's famed as one of the greatest listeners of his generation. So I tell people, imagine yourself as Bill Clinton as you're talking to this person, trying to make this person feel like they're the only person in the room that matters, actually. So it gives people a touchstone, a spark for inspiration to bring out this side of their personality.
Yeah, so I guess I could see some maybe ethical considerations or issues with using disguises and going undercover. Are there any particular ethical guardrails that those employing those techniques should be cognizant of or use when they're going undercover to disguise their identities?
Are you talking about the brand world or the CIA?
I guess both. I mean, it could be the CIA or investigators doing their diligence and work related to brand investigations.
Yeah, well, in terms of ethics, there is an ethical framework at the CIA that they use to help case officers in the field make decisions. So, for instance, the CIA doesn't want a case officer saying, "Oh, this mission could be blown and it will make the agency look bad." They want fidelity to the mission to be above protecting the reputation of the agency. So, and that actually becomes an interesting discussion about ethics and corporate leadership. And I do a lot of advising of leaders to think about that. But when it comes to the ethics of disguises and cover stories, ethics there involve, you don't want to pose as a journalist, which unfortunately we see in the Middle East where people are abusing journalistic cover, and that's creating a mess in the media. We don't have to get into that, but there's been concerns in the past of spies impersonating NGO workers. So there are some ethical constraints in that respect in the world of espionage. In the brand world, you know, I don't think that you'll be faced with those same ethical conundrums unless I'm not seeing something. Maybe you could bring it to my attention. I would imagine if you're trying to sniff out. Counterfeiting, for instance, and you got on Facebook Marketplace, you might have to pose as, I don't know, a teenage girl to, be credible as you're engaging the seller of a certain product, and to grow that relationship. I don't see any ethical compunctions there. I could see, being someone who is impersonating somebody who might buy a large amount of counterfeit goods from the black market or on the dark web. And I don't see any ethical constraints in doing that, as long as you're not, posing as, say, a vulnerable population, or exploiting the other side for profit on yours. You're looking to protect the brand, and you want to pose as the type of person who would be natural to be contacting that counterfeiter, that abuser of brand IP to collaborate with them. So I don't think there's a huge amount of ethical concern on that side, unless I'm missing something.
Yeah, no, you're not missing something, and that makes a whole lot of sense to me. That an investigator will need to pose in disguise to fit the profile of the person that makes sense to be making the approach in order
Hmm.
to gain the information that they need for the investigation.
Right.
In Sell Like a Spy, you talk about another technique, and that is detecting deception through behavioral cues. I thought this was also really interesting. Can you speak to those techniques and what's and maybe a few things about what to look for in that regard?
Sure. One of the things I like to start with when it comes to detecting deception is that anybody who tells you that they can, with high reliability numbers, tell if someone is lying is wrong. Okay, even a polygraph gets it wrong sometimes. Human beings are too varied and too complex for you to be able to say, "Hey, he just arched his eyebrows. She just kind of smirked in a certain way." People sometimes come into corporate settings and say, "I'm going to make your team a human lie detector," and it just doesn't work. But I mentioned an information gap earlier and narrowing that through vulnerability. You can narrow an information gap when it comes to deception by reading certain cues. So if you talk to people in law enforcement, they might say to you the phrase, the body reveals what the mind conceals. So we're adept at lying with our words and with our faces too, but our bodies give ourselves away a lot of times, right? So a lot of people in law enforcement might have the following experience. Thank you, Mr. Smith, for coming down to the precinct today and speaking with me about this investigation. Could I call you again if I have more information? And they say, "Oh, sure," but they're shaking their head no, because their body, their subconscious, is giving them away. It happens more often than you think. One of the other things that you can look at is if you're interviewing someone about, a counterfeiting situation, again, maybe it's an employee, an internal investigation, and you're sitting in a room that you've been in for most of the day, your colleagues have been in, no one feels really hot or cold, and someone is in there and they're freezing, they're shivering. Well, that's an indication that they might be being deceptive, because when we're anxious and our heart is racing, it's harder for the blood to get to the outer layers. So we become cold. So people who are lying are often kind of shivering and shaking because they're anxious in that way. So that gives things away too. In terms of other aspects of body language, there are other clues that we have to people's comfort and how they're feeling. So a lot of times I'm working with people in a business development setting, and you might share a price with somebody and watch as they reach back and start to rub the back of their neck, which is a comfort gesture. So people, they do a variety of those. They rub their legs, they rub their necks, they wring their hands together, things that bring us comfort as a human being. Now, someone could be rubbing the back of their neck because a fly just landed on it. You don't want to just decide based on that one gesture that this person isn't telling the truth. But when I tell people that if you raise when the proposal will be, delivered, or the final project, or what the price might be, and they engage in a comfort gesture, it's an important data point to put in the mosaic of data that I talk about. We should be collecting on people, their words and their behaviors, in order to understand them better. So, if you're in a line of questioning in an investigation and all of a sudden they cross their arms, it's known as a blocking gesture. If they put a water bottle between you and them, or anything, if they put their pen down in the middle of the table, note when they do that, because anything that they put between you and them is a blocking gesture. And it's something we engage in subconsciously when we don't want to hear something, much in the same way we grab the bridge of our nose and close our eyes when we hear something we don't want to hear. That's a blocking gesture. So a good investigator looking to find out about, brand issues and counterfeiting will note the body language of the person, in addition to the verbal ways that people tend to lie and obscure their behavior. And again, put that into the broader mosaic of information they're getting on that person to make a judgment.
Yeah, so all of that's really interesting. I guess this is not meant to be a trick question, but for those in the trademark world that do a lot of these investigations or play a role in anti counterfeiting, what's the quickest way to tell if someone is lying about the source of a product?
Again, I don't have the silver bullet, but I'll give you. We talked about some physical, some of the verbal things. I like to pick on Boston sports because I'm a New York guy. So the famous example is Tom Brady, the star quarterback on the Patriots. There was a big scandal known as Deflategate when they were accused of deflating the footballs to make them easier for Tom to handle and throw. He was asked by a journalist, Tom, did you know about them deflating the footballs? And Tom said, "Oh, I would never cheat." Well, he didn't answer the question there, right? So when you hear someone not answer a question in that way, that's a red flag. It's not proof that they're cheating, but it's a red flag. Another thing that people do is talk in a circular way. Hey, Larry, did you steal the petty cash from the petty drawer? And he says, "Oh, petty cash is used for so many things here. We buy birthday cakes for birthdays, toner for the printer, and he starts going on and on. They're obscuring the facts. They're trying to buy themselves more time with their answers. So when people are innocent, they tend to answer really candidly, really calmly. They can get upset, and you have to keep that in mind. Being, asked as a part of an investigation by somebody that you don't work with or maybe law enforcement can be very intimidating. But when somebody starts invoking oaths, saying, "I swear on the eyes of my children, I didn't do this." Well, you have to ask yourself, why so dramatic? When we're innocent, we tend to say simply, "No, I didn't do that."
So it sounds like look for either indirect answers or extremes, extreme definitives like no, absolutely not, I swear on my life, something like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good way. Extremes, you have to ask yourself, why so extremes? Dodging the answer, that's a red flag. Failure to understand the question, looking around the room for answers as if they're out there and asking for the question to be repeated. I joke around and say, well, they could be half deaf like me and miss, a word or two, or they could be buying themselves time. That's a common aspect of people lying. They'll think, and then they'll go, "Can you repeat the question?" And what they're really doing is buying themselves some time so that they can think about how to lie further.
Yeah, so I guess in that instance, if they say repeat the question, are you repeating that question or are you stating the question in a different way to see if they receive it differently?
That's an interesting idea to do. I kind of would to show them that I heard that and I'm a little bit on to them. I would keep steady eye contact and ask the very same question to show them that, hey, I don't need to reframe this for you. I would suggest asking it in the same way.
Got it. Yeah. So making clear that they sort of should have understood it the first time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess switching gears again to another concept discussed in your book, you discuss the concept of red teaming. What is that? Can you explain?
Yeah, red teaming is serving as the other side, the side that might be attacking, the side that wants to understand your vulnerability. It's political opposition research. It's cyber security folks acting as hackers. In the case of the brand or counterfeiting world, it's working with a firm like Interfor International to come in and say, "Hey, we're going to go around to your various companies that you guys have producing product, and we might approach employees and see if they'd be willing to engage in counterfeiting. We might go to markets and see what is available in those cases. It's probing the vulnerabilities in a proactive way so that you can figure out where those vulnerabilities are and shore them up.
Got it. Got it. That's interesting. Do you have an example of real world practice how this has been implemented?
Yeah, I mean the best example is the cyber world because that's really what it's all about, and we do that as well with our clients at Interfor, where we'll be hired by a company and they'll say, we recently had a breach. We think we've addressed that breach, but we're concerned about other things, and we'll work with them and we'll send certain emails and see if people click on them. We'll I'm not the cyber guy, but we will attempt to breach those cyber defenses and see where there might be weak spots, and we'll understand the human side of it as well. Clicking on certain things. Will somebody walk in and be able to insert a USB card in a place that they shouldn't have? So it's about combining both of those things, the human and the technical side, which I think Interfor is particularly good at bringing together that technical and human side to understand the broader aspect of where those vulnerabilities are.
Yeah, so a little bit more on the human side. In your book, speaking of the human side, there's a good amount of discussions about active listening.
Mhm.
That's something that lawyers, enforcement professionals, marketing professionals alike can all benefit from. Could you talk a little bit about the active listening strategies that you discuss in your book and how those may translate to law and even marketing and anti-counterfeiting initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, hold me to it on making sure I talk about those areas specifically. But I say that active listening, benefits everybody. Active listening is really hard. We're all bad active listeners. Okay, we all listen with an intention to reply, not an intention to understand. And what I try to help people do. As I urge them to develop an active listening practice, because there's no technique. There's no button to push. There's no trick to turn you into a great active listener. You have to commit yourself to being an active listener and understanding the importance of it. All the skills I write about in the book and I train teams on and speak about flow from being a good active listener. And I often challenge people to think of the best listener they've ever experienced. And I remind them how, and it's universal, how high an opinion they have of that person. Because when we feel listened to, we feel seen, respected, and understood. So, I can definitely say that, in brand, in enforcement, marketing, lawyers trying to develop relationships with people, oftentimes talking about very difficult subjects, empathy, careful listening, not interrupting, using some of the same language back with them, which gets into the world of verbal mirroring, are all flow from good active listening. And one of the things I like to talk about to level set at the beginning of these discussions is that we are hardwired to be bad active listeners. Okay. So you can forgive yourself for being such a bad active listener as you try to overcome it. When language was first developing, when we were primitive man on the savannah, looking for things that we can kill and eat and looking to avoid things that wanted to kill and eat us, language developed. And we needed to understand what our compatriot was saying very quickly to make sure we could scan for risks and opportunities, right? So we developed in a way where we understand things 40% faster than our ability to speak. And you see this when you're talking to somebody, they're nodding their head, their body language gets impatient, and they sometimes even finish your sentence for you because they know where you're going before you're done speaking, and they really are ready for you to shut the heck up already so that they can share their oh so interesting anecdote with you that they're dying to tell you. That's the way all of us work. We also, and this is a controversial figure and it varies, but some say we listen, we comprehend roughly 90% based on body language and tone of voice, and only 10% based on the words that we're hearing, which is quite shocking. And some people think it varies, 70-30. I personally think it varies widely based on who you are, who you're talking to, the time of day, the subject matter, all these different details matter. But the bottom line is everyone agrees with this, listen more and take in body language and tone of voice. And I like to compare that to listening to a song. You might love a certain pop song and you might only know the chorus or a few of the lyrics, but you get the emotional meaning of it because, in conversation, body language and tone of voice is melody and the lyrics are the words in a song. So that's how our mind comprehends things. And that's also, Christine, why we're so bad with names. We meet somebody and we're taking in body language and everything about that person physically and who they are in our social strata. Are they a friend, a foe? Are they, somebody I might work with? Are they a potential love interest? And the name feels superfluous. It goes in one ear and out the other. So you really need to have a really focused approach as a listener to connect with people, but it's worth it. And everything I teach flows from it. And, like I say, whether you're a lawyer, a marketing professional, an investigator, using some of the techniques we've talked about earlier, being a calm, collected, and focused listener is the best way to build rapport with somebody and get them to like you and feel that you're on their side and interested in them.
Yeah, so given that it seems people like to talk and observe more than they like to listen, what are some techniques that people can, if you're really looking to take away some information and absorb what you're hearing, as much as you want to talk, you're really trying to actively listen. Are there any specific things that someone can do, for example, if they don't have pen and paper in hand to help them out, to make sure that they're actively listening and doing the best job that they possibly can?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with body language. Make sure that you're calm and steady, and you're making solid eye contact, but as I say, not creepy eye contact. You want to make sure that you're not. People think eye contact is so important, but it's been shown that serial killers make great eye contact. And if someone's not making eye contact, it doesn't mean they're a creep or they're suspicious. They could be just shy. But it's good practice to make reasonably steady eye contact. More and more people understand the cues of body language I was just talking about. So, I've been talking to people all over the country about how if you're talking to somebody and, as I noted earlier, that we're adept at lying with words in our face, but it's harder to lie with the rest of the body, you'll find that people point their feet away if they want to exit a conversation. So you might be talking to somebody, but you might look down and note, hey, their feet are pointed towards the door. They actually really do want to leave and they're not listening as well. They're just trying to be polite here. But in terms of other, I have another little thing I tell people sometimes because the urge to reply with, again, that oh so interesting anecdote that you want to share, your incredible opinion that you can't wait to share. What you want to do is mentally visualize a chest of drawers in your head, and you pull out a drawer and you place that anecdote, that opinion in the drawer. Don't close it all the way, close it most of the way, and it's there. It's ready to be opened up when there's a lull in conversation and there's a really good, appropriate moment for you to say, hey, I also have been to the Philippines, or I also, enjoy 2 cups of coffee in the morning. Whatever the conversation is, you can get back to that. But if you use a mental technique like that, it will free up your mind to focus again on the conversation.
Got it. So put all the noise in a drawer for later.
Exactly.
And if somebody tells you you have really good eye contact, they might be asking ever so slightly if you're a serial killer.
You might be freaking them out a little bit, and you might
Yes.
want to, take it down a level.
Got it. Got it. Okay. That's all really interesting. So listen to the words and the body language.
Indeed.
And don't be so eager to reply.
Yes.
So in the book, we were just talking a lot about body language, active listening. You encourage adopting a spy mindset, and you say that that includes curiosity and anonymity, and creating intelligence. So, what advice can you offer to trademark counsel and others that are charged with brand protection, seeking to move from a more reactive enforcement to a proactive, intelligence-driven strategy, about a spy, about adopting a spy mindset and how that can help?
Yeah. That's a challenging question, because I think it's about prep work. I think it's about thinking like the bad guys a little bit. Who will want to take advantage of you guys? Where are the market vulnerabilities? What have we learned from the past in this way? Trying to think like somebody in that way will help you red team it, if you will. So, what was the first part of the things that you mentioned there? There was one thing I wanted to come back to.
Yeah, so I guess the main question is based
Curiosity.
on your advice about adopting a spy mindset. What
Yeah.
advice can you offer to trademark counsel and others that are charged with brand protection and enforcement strategies that are seeking to move from a more reactive
Yeah.
enforcement environment where things kind of come to their attention and then they react to a more proactive, intelligence driven strategy?
Yeah, well, I do want to come back to that concept you asked at first about curiosity, because one of the things that I can say unites all of the case officers I've worked with, interviewed, spent time with is they're intellectually omnivorous people. They're intellectually curious people. They tend to be able to talk about a really wide range of subjects. They tend to be curious about the world and people. They tend to, again, with listening, they tend to not want to only talk about themselves. You'll find as you start on a journey for active listening and trying to improve your emotional intelligence and communication skills that you'll see so many people are narcissistic and self-centered and want to focus on themselves, and you can actually use that to grow relationships, understanding people's vanity and how much they want to talk about themselves, and using that, so and becoming that great active listener. And I think that applies anywhere, but I think it could particularly apply to people in law and marketing and brand enforcement, getting people to talk about sensitive issues, getting them to open up to you, and being calm in your body language, being patient as people tell you kind of long-winded things will open things up for you over time with those people, and there'll be really good takeaways if you really cultivate some of those skills.
Yeah, so I guess we talked about a lot of tactics today. In your view, what is one spy tactic that every in-house trademark team should learn? And that means any in-house trademark team, they're usually charged with brand protection, brand enforcement, anti-counterfeiting, sometimes transactions involving their brand. I guess what would you say is the most important tactic?
Well, I've spent a lot of time talking about active listening already. I always put that at the top. So being a great listener, letting people tell you things because they people want to tell you things. And if you tee them up with some of the techniques we talked about, that can be a really great thing for the success of any investigator. We've only touched upon mirroring a tiny bit. Mirroring is the physical replication of another person's body language. Verbal mirroring is the replication of language that you're hearing. And if you combine the two, and if you use some of the same language that you're hearing as you're, subtly mirroring how their posture is, how they're sitting, you will find that people will think this person is on my side. They're useful to me. Uh, and that will help you to build rapport with any subject, any individual that you're looking to connect with to tell you things, often sensitive things.
Yeah, so with the concept of mirroring, is there, I guess, cautions to be used? I mean, I could see how that could backfire if you're doing it incorrectly or you're doing it too much. What are some things to be cognizant of when you're trying to mirror someone?
Yeah, Christine, I think you've read my book. I definitely talk about how
I did read your book.
challenging mirroring can be, right? Mirroring I describe as the one, I tell people these are skills for everyday life, and the more you make them your own and practice them and refine them before you bring them into the world corporate world is a good idea, right? And mirroring is the most important one. So mirroring you want to practice with friends and family because if you're sitting across from somebody and they go, "What the heck are you doing?" You can have a laugh about it. You want to start subtle, right? So if you're someone who speaks with a lot of body language and you're sitting across from someone who's extremely calm, you don't want to become statue still because that'll just make you awkward. You want to continue to show your personality, but you want to be subtle about how you mirror things. So you don't want to verbally mirror somebody by repeating the entire sentence they just said and then going on. You want to look for keywords, colloquialisms, pet words that we're all fond of saying, and see if you can incorporate that a little bit in. If your counterpart across the table is leaning forward with elbows on the table, you want to do that rather than sit back with your legs posed. So start slow, start subtle with mirroring, practice it with friends and family, make it a routine part of how you interact with people before you bring it into the business world and could mess it up by because if you do it wrongly, as you point out, it looks like you're copying someone, mocking them, and obviously that's not where you want to be.
So mirror, not mimic, and practice before you execute.
Well said. Yes.
So, in your view, what is the most underrated source of intelligence in brand enforcement?
I'm not an expert in it, but certainly the deep and dark web. If I was going deeper into this world, I would become more of an expert in deep and dark web. The work we do at Interfor International, I get involved in more of the human intelligence collection. We have a very adept team that combs the deep and dark web for clients, for corporations, for lawyers like yourself. When we have a case like this, to understand where a product is being sold. But if I was advising, again, coming back to being proactive and not just playing defense, understanding the deep and dark web and combing through these areas to see where your product is potentially being resold is a good practice.
Great, thanks. So I just have one final question for you, and for any listener seeking to learn through observation. What would you say? What spy movie gets the closest to real life intelligence work, and why?
Oh, great question. I get asked this a lot, and I'm going to give you actually two answers because there's kind of two that I really think of in this way. The first one is Zero Dark 30. I was actually out to lunch today with a former case officer, as well as Don Aviv, the head of Interfor International. We were talking about how 9/11 was the defining moment of individuals of our age, and that chase for Bin Laden was something that animated so much of the work I did as a journalist and in foreign policy. And the movie was made with the cooperation of Leon Panetta and other senior CIA individuals. I thought it captured a lot of the moral ambiguity, the danger, and the sacrifices that case officers make to try to keep us safe, which is something I always like to highlight. So I think it's a terrific movie. I also have happened to have spent time with Matt Bissonnette, who's one of the SEALs who actually did shoot bin Laden. It wasn't just that guy, Robert O'Neill. There were three people who put a bullet into the arch terrorist. And he was an incredible individual and told, basically what you see at the end of that movie is largely correct about how that raid happened. So I think that's fascinating. And then finally, I mentioned I'm with Interfor International. I'm a strategic advisor here. And as you noted, head of Interfor Academy. It was founded by Yuval Aviv, who was the inspiration for the Eric Bana character in the movie Munich, directed by Steven Spielberg. So I have great affection for that film. And how it was, how it portrayed, again, the moral ambiguity, the thoroughness, the long slog that a lot of espionage is involved with, and how long it takes is, I think, accurate as well. So those are two that I tend to point to as movies that I've really enjoyed in that genre.
Well, thanks, Jeremy, for all that information and for the movie recommendations, giving me something to do over the weekend. That wraps up our episode on on investigations and sell like a spy tactics. Thanks for joining us today. If you have any questions or want us to cover any other specific topic related to brands, please feel free to drop us a line. And thanks for listening to The Upper Brand. See you next time.